Right in the heart of Michigan, there are neighborhoods where even the police limit their patrols at night. Not because crime is rampant, but because the despair here has gone beyond the law's control. They call this place the gray zone. Patches of land between two worlds. In the year 2025, homelessness is no longer just a big city problem. This is the fiercest front of an imbalanced America, where a roof over one's head becomes a privilege and survival each night is a fragile miracle. Welcome to Michigan. Here the cold isn't the only enemy. The spreading pain of homelessness, Michigan, a land of vast lakes, vibrant autumn maple forests, and quaint towns bearing the mark of classic America. This is where the sunset gently falls upon Lake Superior, where white snow covers the hills in winter, and where many once believed the American dream could start anew. But amidst that beauty, a paradox arises. Beneath the pristine white snow and amidst the ancient streets are tens of thousands of people with no place to call home. As of 2023, 33,226 people in Michigan are experiencing homelessness. And if the current trend is not controlled, this number could reach 36,000 by the end of 2025. This is no longer an isolated urban issue. It is a widespread social crisis, silent but powerful, touching even the smallest communities. What is even more shocking, nearly 48% of the homeless are families with children. That means thousands of children are growing up without their own bed, without a stable study desk, and sometimes without knowing where they will sleep tomorrow. This crisis is not just concentrated in familiar names like Detroit or Flint. It has spread to small towns, rural areas, and even the Upper Peninsula, a region once considered peaceful and rich in local identity. There, a shortage of affordable housing, harsh weather, and a fragile social safety net make residents even more vulnerable. Across the statewide education system, 9,315 students have been identified as living in unstable housing situations, meaning they might be living in cars, temporary shelters, or constantly moving, making schooling incredibly difficult. The question arises, how can a state with abundant resources, a thriving industrial history, and close-knit communities allow tens of thousands of people, including children, to live without a home? In the middle of Michigan, where nature is vast and proud, a deep social void exists. And if we do not listen, do not look directly, that void will only continue to expand. Michigan hiding. So what has pushed tens of thousands of people in Michigan out of their own homes? The answer doesn't lie in a single reason. Rather, it's a chain of systemic failures silently unfolding over many years. In the past 3 years, average rent prices in Michigan have increased by 36%. Meanwhile, workers' incomes have remained largely stagnant. A one-bedroom apartment in Lansing or Grand Rapids now costs over $1,000 per month. And that's not including utilities, food, or medical care. Someone working full-time at Michigan's minimum wage, approximately $12.50 per hour, after paying rent, has almost nothing left to live on. No savings, no insurance, no fallback. Just one car accident, one job loss, or one unexpected medical bill, and they fall straight into the abyss. Furthermore, the state lacks at least 188,000 affordable housing units compared to current demand. Even with support policies, waiting lists often stretch for years. Affordable housing in Michigan for many is no longer a feasible concept, but a luxury. Meanwhile, the social welfare system is overloaded. Programs like rental assistance food stamps or Medicaid exist, but they come with stacks of convoluted procedures, document requirements, appointments, and assessments, things that a person living on the street finds very difficult to meet. Those most in need of help are the ones who find it hardest to access the system. Another area severely overlooked: mental health. Depression, anxiety disorders, post-traumatic stress disorder, common problems in the homeless community, are not diagnosed in time, not treated properly. In rural areas, mental health centers are almost non-existent. In cities, one waits months for a brief consultation, and so the vicious cycle repeats. When a family struggles with financial instability, the stress builds up day after day, turning into a psychological burden. Anxiety disorders, depression, or even post-traumatic stress disorder make it difficult for them to maintain stable employment. Loss of ability to work means no longer having enough income to pay for a home. When that door closes, they gradually fall to the margins of the social welfare system, where all procedures and support, already complex, become impossible for those without a safety net. A system designed to help is now leaving too many people behind. Number 3. Neighborhoods forgotten by society. When it comes to the homelessness crisis in Michigan, many immediately think of Detroit, once the automobile industrial capital of America. But deep within that metropolis are blind spots that the government has almost abandoned. In Hamtramck Highland Park, or areas of East Detroit, nightfall brings not just cold. It also brings a peculiar silence. Police rarely appear. Not because there is no crime, but because these neighborhoods have gone beyond the normal control of the law. In the dark alleys, makeshift tents spring up next to the sidewalks. Inside are all kinds of intertwined lives. A man who used to be a factory worker, a woman fleeing domestic violence, some youths with no family to rely on. Around them, other social ills take root: violence, drugs, theft. All happening within the cramped space of tarpaulins and cardboard boxes. For many here, the only law that exists is the law of survival. When public authority fades, communities are forced to find ways to protect each other. There are small groups that take turns guarding at night, establishing unwritten rules to maintain peace in the encampments. Some local churches try to provide food or blankets, but that help is just like flickering candles in the deep darkness. We met an elderly man in Highland Park. He used to be a Marine. He spoke slowly, his eyes distant. "We don't fear the police. We fear invisibility." That is the fear of being forgotten, of being treated as non-existent in a developing society. These areas are called by many names by the residents: gray zones, blind spots, or simply places no one wants to mention. But whatever the name, their nature remains the same. It is a place where poverty and despair have become a familiar landscape. When a neighborhood becomes a space where even the police limit their presence, it doesn't just reflect danger. It also reveals a painful reality. There are communities being completely left behind outside the concern of the entire system. And the question arises, if these neighborhoods have become gray zones in the eyes of society, how many people within them will ever have a chance to step into the light? Unexpected death in Michigan's gray zones. If losing a home is a long slide that pushes many to the margins of society, then fentanyl is the final trap that blocks the way back. The housing crisis is already harsh enough, but with fentanyl, it turns into a daily struggle for life. Fentanyl is not a luxury drug. It is cheap, easy to find, and permeates everywhere. Seemingly harmless sleeping pills, black market cannabis bags, or even heroin that addicts are already familiar with can now be laced with fentanyl. Just 2 milligrams, smaller than a grain of rice, is enough to claim a life. That's why it has become a ghost, haunting all the encampments, the alleys where homeless people reside. Jason is one of thousands of faces in Michigan with a similar story. He used to be a construction worker, had a stable job and a small apartment in Detroit. But then the factory closed, he lost his job, and bills piled up. When he could no longer afford rent, Jason slid from a friend's sofa to cold nights in an old car and finally onto the streets. There, amidst loneliness and despair, he turned to drugs as a way to temporarily forget reality. One evening, Jason received a cheap bag of heroin from an acquaintance. He had no idea it was laced with fentanyl. The next morning, he was found unconscious in an alley, breathing faintly. Only thanks to a passing relief worker carrying naloxone, an opioid overdose reversal drug, did he escape death. Jason is alive, but many others are not. In 2022, Michigan recorded over 2,900 deaths from opioid overdoses, mostly related to fentanyl. In the homeless community, the risk is even higher because they often don't know exactly what they are using. And when cold hunger and pain strike, that cheap drug seems to be the only option. That's why today, relief groups in Michigan consider naloxone a mandatory item like carrying water or warm blankets. They recount days when they had to intervene multiple times, saving people who were fading right in front of their tents. The image of a social worker bending down, injecting naloxone while surrounded by trash and the sound of passing cars has become a familiar reality. When mentioning the homelessness crisis, many immediately think of housing or employment. But in Michigan today, the issue is even more urgent. With fentanyl rampant, this is not just a housing crisis. It has turned into a battle for survival, where death can come from a single cheap dose of drug given in the dark. When Michigan is no longer a safe place. In any crisis, there will always be groups of people who suffer more than others. And with homelessness in Michigan, this picture becomes clearer than ever. It's not just a story of statistics, but of communities that are already fragile now struggling amidst multiple layers of overlapping injustice. Women fleeing domestic violence are one of the most vulnerable groups. They carry young children, a few hastily packed clothes, and fear etched on their faces. Yet when they seek shelter, many places are not safe enough, lack private rooms, or are already full. One mother shared, "I escaped a violent home, only to fall into a place where I didn't dare to sleep because it was too crowded with strangers." For them, homelessness is not just losing a home, but extending an endless journey of insecurity. LGBTQ+ youth are also caught in this vicious cycle. Rejected by their parents, many are pushed onto the streets at 16 or 17 years old. With nowhere to turn, they easily become targets for exploiters drawn into exploitation rings or addiction. A teenager in Detroit recounted starting to use drugs just to endure having to sleep in abandoned houses. Such stories are not uncommon, and they reflect a truth. Losing a home is just the first step in an even more dangerous spiral. Veterans are another often unmentioned group, but are widely present in the homeless community. They once wore uniforms, fought in Iraq or Afghanistan, but upon returning, many carry invisible wounds. Post-traumatic stress disorder, depression haunting memories. The VA's support system is slow, procedures are complex, leaving many overlooked. John, a veteran we met in East Detroit, said he lost everything because he couldn't bear the recurring nightmares. For him, losing his home was not the beginning, but the final consequence of a long chain of abandonment after leaving the service. The elderly and disabled are also not excluded from this cycle. Living on fixed allowances, already meager, they face rising living costs daily. An increased electricity bill, a new medication not covered by insurance, can also push them out of their only small apartment. And once they step out that door, returning is almost impossible. Among these vulnerable groups, the clear commonality is that they did not choose life on the streets. They were pushed there by gaps in the system, by social stigma, and by long-standing inequalities. Each face, each story is a reminder that homelessness is not just losing a home, but losing the last layer of protection against the fragility of human existence. How is the aid system failing? When it comes to homelessness, many believe that the social welfare system will be the final safety net, helping those who fall into the abyss to get back on their feet. But the reality in Michigan in 2025 reveals a paradox. The system exists, but it is too slow, too crowded, and has too many loopholes to hold everyone. The Section 8 program, once hoped to be an escape for tens of thousands of families, is stuck in perennial gridlock. The waiting list is so long that many liken it to applying when your child is in elementary school, and by the time you get a result, they're already adults. During that time, they struggle daily, renting cheap motel rooms, temporarily staying in cars, or pitching tents in abandoned lots. Section 8, instead of being a lifeline, becomes a distant promise. Other essential programs like SNAP or Medicaid are no better. On paper, they offer opportunities for food assistance and medical care to all poor people. But for the homeless, basic requirements like a fixed address or identification become insurmountable barriers. How can they fill in the residential address box when they don't even know where they'll sleep tonight? A man in Flint recounted that his application was rejected simply because he didn't have a mailing address. "If I had an address, I wouldn't need to apply for assistance," he said bitterly. Shelters, once considered safe havens, no longer fully serve their function. In Detroit, lines of people stretching hundreds of meters outside shelters in winter are a familiar sight. But not everyone gets in. When beds run out, they have to return to the streets where cold violence and insecurity always lurk. Many even choose to sleep outdoors rather than crowd into a cramped room where conflicts or theft can occur at any time. Even more worrying are the gaps in mental health and addiction support systems. Amidst rampant fentanyl and rising rates of depression and post-traumatic stress disorder, these services are severely lacking. In Michigan's rural areas, finding a psychologist can sometimes be harder than finding an open pharmacy. In cities, waiting lists can extend for months, even years, causing many to give up before they can access help. A social worker in Grand Rapids admitted, "We can find someone a place to stay for the night, but finding a therapist might take a year." When all these pieces are put together, a harsh picture emerges. The aid system hasn't completely disappeared, but it's slow overloaded and so alien that many cannot reach it. And in every one of those gaps, despair creeps in, making faith in society's ability to protect increasingly fragile. A way out of the homelessness crisis. In the bleak picture of Michigan's homelessness crisis, there are still bright spots proving that society has not completely turned its back. These are not radical solutions, but important steps forward showing that change is possible if communities, government, and compassion work together. A prime example is Built for Zero Michigan, a network linking local areas and social organizations to centralize data on homelessness. Instead of each unit operating individually, information is now shared in real time, helping to avoid omissions or overlaps. This allows relief groups to accurately identify who needs immediate support, while also detecting early cases at risk of long-term homelessness. As a result, interventions become more proactive and timely, not just crisis management after the fact. In parallel, the Housing First model in Grand Rapids and Ann Arbor proves its worth by reversing traditional thinking. instead of requiring homeless individuals to solve all personal problems first. Housing First prioritizes providing them with a safe home immediately. From that foundation, they then have the opportunity to overcome addiction, undergo psychological therapy, or find employment. Reality has shown when stable housing is provided, many voluntarily enter recovery programs, regain self-confidence, and gradually restore their lives. In Ann Arbor, another initiative attracting attention is tiny homes villages. Compact, low-cost homes with basic amenities are built in clusters accompanied by vocational support and psychological counseling. More than just housing, these tiny villages form cohesive communities where residents feel welcome, have opportunities to learn, and start anew. This is proof that a decent home can restore self-respect and encourage social integration. Beyond housing, Michigan is also focusing on saving lives threatened by fentanyl. The widespread distribution of free naloxone has become an important shield. For relief workers in Detroit, this medication is as crucial as warm blankets or meal boxes. Just a timely injection can bring someone back from the brink of death, offering another chance to start over. These efforts, while not enough to end the crisis, show a fundamental shift from short-term responses to building long-term foundations. They affirm that homelessness is not an immutable fate, and if invested in properly, Michigan can entirely rewrite this story in a more humane direction. Political ambition, or homes for the people. When discussing the homelessness crisis in Michigan, people often mention rent prices, lack of jobs, or mental health issues. But there is another deeper, less discussed layer: political conflicts and budget constraints. Silent factors that determine whether solutions can be implemented. First and foremost are the barriers from construction regulations themselves. Many affordable housing projects, despite specific plans, are still blocked by zoning laws. Land use regulations originally designed to protect community order, but now becoming obstacles to change. Along with this is the not in my backyard, NIMBY mentality. Many residents agree that the city needs more social housing, but when a project is proposed near their neighborhood, opposition immediately flares up. Fearing a decrease in property values, fearing a loss of security, they fight to prevent it. The result is that potential land sits vacant while thousands of people still live in cars or under tents. Tension is even clearer when looking at the budget balance. Local governments already have to split resources among many different sectors: education, infrastructure, healthcare, public safety. In that overall picture, social housing often does not receive the highest priority. When budgets are limited, every dollar spent must be carefully considered. And because the interests of the homeless rarely yield clear political achievements, investment in them is often cut or delayed. Many small cities even rely almost entirely on state or federal funding, which is also under similar pressure. Another equally important issue is the inconsistency in policy. In Michigan, the direction changes with each leadership term. A governor or mayor might strongly support the Housing First model, but their successor cuts or shifts to another solution. This makes long-term programs difficult to sustain. Residents, nonprofit organizations, and even families in need of assistance are caught in a cycle of uncertainty today. They might receive support, but tomorrow is not guaranteed. Viewed from this perspective, the homelessness crisis is not just a story about lack of housing or jobs, but also reflects the deadlock in how political and financial systems operate. Conflicts between communities, divisions within the government, and short-term priorities have unintentionally turned the issue into a problem with no clear solution. The question arises, can Michigan overcome these political and financial barriers to implement a long-term strategy? Or will the crisis continue to be prolonged and due to a lack of solutions, but due to a lack of consensus and determination? The homelessness crisis in Michigan in 2025 is not just in reports. It is present in every street, every park corner, and in the cars that have become unwilling homes for thousands of families. It is not just a housing problem, but a mirror reflecting the fragility of the entire social system, where a small incident is enough to push people to the margins. The biggest challenge is not a lack of solutions, but a lack of determination to transform scattered small models into a common strategy. The question is, will we view homelessness as an inevitable part of urban life or as a failure that must be corrected? If you believe these stories need to be spread, please like and subscribe to NVL Travel Documentary to join us in our journey of telling humane truths.